You guys ready?
So that's the place where people aren't willing to make that next transition. They opt out. Okay, we're helping.
All right. So if you have a question at the table, if you can raise your hand and we'll have the mics come by. So a mic right here. But before we start, what did you hear that was common and what did you hear that was different in your 3 presentations?
We actually were just talking about how much we had in common, that we could have lifted a lot of the insights from each other's presentation and plugged our name at the top of the deck.
Yeah.
So we were exchanging things that we thought were of value of each other's presentations.
So we all talked a little bit about talent, and that seems to be a big focus for everyone these days.
Yeah, building talent versus getting rid of talent. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we kind of showed is the model itself is very similar, and it takes that commitment and tenacity through leadership and sort of persevering and driving those changes, because I think you've mentioned too, when you look at it, when you're in it, it's these little incremental changes, but when you step back and reflect over the years, you can actually see that movement. And keeping the organization and individuals motivated through that change is what the leadership team has to do.
It's a large part of the challenge, right? Because people get lost in those incremental changes and they're like, yeah, we're not making any progress, or, maybe we should have the program of the month, but it's small incremental change. Okay, we've got a question here. Yeah, can you say your name and your company, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm Chris Reed with Ferguson Enterprises. First, thank you all for taking the time to present this morning and the courage to get up in front of all of us and speak to us about your experience. I heard at least a couple times about the importance of collaboration within the supply chain. And I think about that, and that's a challenge that I think we all face, but that's really a cluster of skills, experiences. It's not just something that you can check the box on a resume that you have or don't have. So can you describe a little bit about how you identify a collaborative person and how you develop them to be even more collaborative considering our needs?
That's a great question.
Well, I can take a shot, and I'll speak from my own personal experience. Some of my best opportunities for collaboration came through my own failures and kind of learning what worked and didn't work. So I think you're right in the sense of you can't say, oh, here's the collaboration class, check, and do it, because it's so much in how you build the relationships, and it's interacting with people. And guess what? This business unit and myself could have had a very good collaboration, but an individual changed, and all of a sudden we're back to square one. And it goes ultimately back to trust. And you've got to be able to build trust with whoever it is you're interacting with, whether it's an organization or it's an individual. And for myself, and what I coach individuals on and what I look for is, one, understanding how people trust. I personally trust people. I go in sort of eyes wide open, I trust you, until you lose it. And once you lose it, you're probably not getting it back. And then there's other individuals who, you have to earn it over time, but once you earn it, you're never gonna lose it, so to speak. And so you have to have that emotional intelligence, or be able to sense those relationships, both your own self-awareness and then I think around you what's going on. And that's what I look for people, is the EQ. What is their ability to sense and understand what's not only going on within their own head and how they're interacting, but how are they able to sense and observe what's going on around them and then take that to move forward.
Well, that assumes that the person values relationships, right? And, if we've got cross-generational issues here, and we've also got people that maybe have skill sets, like I was thinking about the analytics conversation I had with Andrea. Sometimes our best analytics people are low on EQ, right? But they've got some skills that we need. How do you balance that?
I think we deal with that quite often, because you'll bring in analytical people and you put them in collaborative type roles and so forth. And I think very direct and open coaching is key for them. And so they want to improve, they want to learn. And we have a great example recently where just a very, very capable individual, and but just really struggled collaborating, but turned the corner, done a complete 180, and is really is a shining star now. And the other, I was going to also respond to the internships, and I can't remember which one talked about the internships, maybe both, or what was it? Okay.
It was Sharon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think internships are a great way then also to validate for sure, does this person have the skills that you want? You can do a lot in an interview around gaining what they were involved in socially at school and so forth to try to see and feel that, but then the internships and for us really validates whether or not that person is a good fit.
I remember last year Intel was here and talked about how you made an offer 2 years before somebody was actually, graduating because you had so much cultural fit and skill fit. Yeah, that you were that committed.
The cultural fit is a big thing, and you don't always see that when you're hiring. And one thing that Kirk made me think of is one of the things we look for is tolerance for ambiguity. So this idea of when individuals are coming out of school, it's kind of a controlled environment in the sense of there's a right answer, and or you get immediate feedback to sort of say, no, go this way, et cetera. And one of the things that we get when we talk with our interns is they'll come back and just say, gosh, you're counting on me to actually make a recommendation or deliver something, and there is no right answer. So that's both exciting, but it's also can be overwhelming and threatening to some cases to them. But one of the things we look for is that something that energizes them, or does it threaten them or create a situation where they're fearful or just they don't like that. And if you see that in the internship, that tends to be a signal you're probably not going to enjoy the roller coaster ride that you're about ready to get on.
I think that's great feedback. I actually had a boss that said, one of the best things you can do is learn how to dance in the world of gray. And I'm like, really? I'm all ready to dance, What's gray look like? Thank you for your question. Who else has got a question? Raise your hand. Do you have a question? Okay, microphone, and then if you can just say your name and a little bit about what you're doing now. Right here.
David Lyons, Present Values Consulting. Lora, you talked about central themes here. Obviously, the theme that comes across not only in the presentations but the conversations that we're having now is around people. And I think about the book that Alex was speed reading here earlier to get some quick notes on for his presentation. Just kidding. Is there a new book in that? Is it people that matter? Because it isn't just what you do in supply chain around building capability and developing people. You're doing that across the entire organization. That isn't necessarily what is making your supply chain successful or admirable across the industry. Maybe it is, but you're also doing that across your entire organization. So are you making a case for, is it really about the people that matter?
And so let's bring that into a question. If you had to define cultural DNA, what 3 adjectives would you use?
Well, so I think that was the second part of my discussion.
Yeah.
It was people first. It's about relationships and delivering on them in terms of the secret sauce that we think makes General Mills work. The cultural DNA is interesting because I came from an industry where I worked for 20 years, introduced into a new company, and quite frankly, the biggest concern you have often in those situations is organ rejection, me being rejected by the organization or vice versa, because you have to learn what's going on. And so there was a lot of conversations that I had. I remember the first 6 months with individuals around what matters here, what is the DNA of the organization. And we started talking a lot about the things that people don't say that are really incredibly important to the value proposition and how work gets done and what people think about in terms of your efforts. So my first boss, I remember at General Mills, he said to me, Andrea, people at General Mills will start to value first what you put in terms of results, but you'll know your value when other people are talking about your results. And so this idea from a DNA perspective of we celebrate each other's value and we champion their values through our organization. So to me, it's those things that are unsaid about how the organization thinks about their people, how people think about other people, and how you continue to execute something culturally that you value. For us, it happens to be execution in our DNA. We value that. We like repeatable success, and we champion that. So I think you have to, when you look at the cultural DNA, I think it's defined specifically for an organization. I think when you know what that is, you're really capable of exploiting it for value, right? Because you're not teaching people new things. It's what we all do without, it's like breathing air. And then I think the other part is where you know you have a major gap, you have to be really honest as a leadership team to talk about why this gap that you've always had now is bigger because of the external environment. And so we love our execution stance, but we also recognize that our business environment is changing faster than we and our culture, our cultural DNA would say, we may not move fast enough. So we have to know that about ourselves and our DNA and go, oh, you know, speed is not our optimal DNA right now.
So
and
let's
to
be
win in the
honest.
marketplace, we need to get better at that.
Yeah.
How do we take a part of our DNA and switch the, you know, flip the switch on that? And so I think that's how I would frame up the DNA question.
Good. How about
Yeah,
yourself
no,
at Eastman?
It's very similar. I was thinking, as Andrea was talking, we have a collaborative culture, okay? So that's the first thing that popped into my mind. But ultimately, if you are so collaborative, sometimes you don't get decisions. And so we are very purposeful now about having bias for action on our performance commitments, okay? And we have to have a bias for action.
That's your blind spot?
Yes, absolutely. And so I would say that's how we would respond to that. The other thing around I think we are spending a lot of time, energy, and effort and some money on improving our coaching capabilities across the organization, across the corporation, and getting some external help around what can you do to make sure that we are coaching appropriately individuals, particularly leaders of the organization and future leaders of the organization. I think that's a focus for us right now.
Yeah,
as
talent
well.
development is not a trivial task.
Yeah.
How about
Yeah,
Sharon?
and I'd say for us within the supply chain, it's integrity. And I mean, we have this defined and we talk about it, but integrity, especially for a supply chain, for us is important because we hold ourselves to a standard, not only internally, we value, you know, doing the right things right and with uncompromising integrity, but as one of the few organizations that is an extension of the corporation and we send that out to the supply chains we work with, we have to conduct ourselves in a way that's tough but fair. And we become that extension and we extend that integrity through our entire supply chain. So, you know, the comment on bias for action, we will never compromise that integrity value to get to market faster or something. If there's something in dealing with China or Africa or these different emerging markets that we go into, we're willing to slow down to stay true to our compass on integrity. The second value is velocity, so the speed is we've got to tend to be that bias or leans toward do it faster because as an engineering company, we tend to want to get it down, dial it in precise and perfect it, and we're missing market opportunity or we're missing opportunities that our customers want us to hit for product delivery, et cetera. And then the last, which I touched on, is excellence through people. So it does come down to, in many ways, the raw materials, the parts, the stuff that we do is the same as anybody has access into the world. What makes it different is the people and how we collaborate and drive those results.
So in your presentation, each of you talked about centers of excellence, or you talked about excellence. And there was one slide that really stuck out about the shift from audit to innovation. And I'd like you to talk about leadership and innovation and what you're doing and the definition of excellence as it ties to innovation. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. We have a big push on innovation. We just hired or named a supply chain innovation manager who is in a center of excellence organization. That person is going to be is responsible now for going across the integrated global supply chain within Eastman to not only just encourage innovation, but also to highlight a lot of the innovation that's already being done. And we do a lot of things, we just don't tell the story. So a lot of it is about, we've got to tell the story of how we are innovating and so forth. So we're doing that right now. We're really excited about that job, and this individual's really hit the ground running. So
is there a particular area that you're innovating in, like new business models or analytics?
It's all about growth, revenue growth and so forth, supporting business growth. So the innovation that is going to get the most attention right now is for those things that we're doing that are helping grow top line for us.
So innovation with customers.
Yeah, with customers, suppliers even as well. And then also with manufacturing, you know, as we try to further optimize potential upside growth.
Okay. Any thoughts there, Andrea or Sharon?
So innovation, I think, are two parts. I agree with your comments about it's all about growth right now. And so our efforts are clearly, even with our teams, regardless of where they sit in the supply chain or R&D, it's how are you growing the business and the efforts of what you're doing. So we have innovation teams that are really about new products, but what we're trying to figure out is what are the insights. And so part of our innovation model right now is around this idea of consumer insights. You know, are we giving customers and consumers exactly what they want? So we have more people that we have looking externally at what those insights are, and then really testing and learning. And so we're in a mode right now of innovating not so much through a set program, but letting some of it be a bit more organic with teams of people that are cross-functional in nature, so that they can find a small thing, which is what we're trying to learn from small companies, right? We want to be the best big small company we can be. And that requires that we think about how small companies really win. And part of it is innovating through incubation, and incubation of ideas with teams that are small, win small, plan big, use your leverage then. And so I think that's a little bit of our approach when we start thinking about the innovation model and how we link it end to end, because that's where we add value is our size.
Great. Sharon?
Yeah, we've struggled inside of Intel relative to using innovation as a definition around supply chain, partly because we, or I say collectively, individuals look at supply chain as it's your job to remove risk. So why you can't innovate? You're there to actually remove all the risk out of that. But from a standpoint of innovation, I think we look across whether it's working upstream with suppliers to ensure that we stay on the cadence of Moore's Law from a technology standpoint. There's all kinds of innovation that's going on with novel material suppliers or equipment suppliers from a technology standpoint. And we have engineers that are within our supply chain that are working and interacting both with TD and HVM and the suppliers to bring those solutions to the ability that we can manufacture. On the product enablement side, there's a lot of innovation going on where we're actually out working with our customers on component level design, and then working with an ecosystem to develop an ecosystem around, so when those products hit the market, you can actually have the components that come in. So I think some of it is on the definition and what you value. The last thing I was going to mention is we just had a conference last week, and we created this idea of, you know, you talk about incubation. We used a Shark Tank concept where we had folks present ideas, and they were vetted through basically a crowdsourcing. So people wrote papers and ideas, and then the crowdsource voted on what were the top ideas, and then the 4 finalists ultimately presented last week at this conference. And the outcome of that was either they got funding, you know, from the executive staff, or in some cases it was a just go do it, right? Here we go. So that in of itself put some fun and energy and involved the broader organization to have that wisdom of the crowd around what are some ideas or what are the pain points that we see in the organization.
Great.
And it was good.
Great. Other questions? Trevor. Can we bring Trevor the mic? So Andrea, talk a little bit, share about your scrappy organization concept while we're transitioning. We were having a conversation yesterday about scrappy organizations.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a hybrid group that we're just testing some new concepts around visibility within our organization. And there was a question that came from the group when we were talking. They said, well, where does talent come into that idea? And I said, well, you know, one of the things we were really purposeful about, I wish I could take credit, but the group that put this team together, which was sanctioned by the head of supply chain, is we needed people that were a bit of a rebel and that were willing to be scrappy. And so what we've typically done to reject some of our cultural DNA on speed is we'll get the project team, we'll work along project charter, we'll have an RFP to 15 vendors, we'll go through the 5 ways from Sunday that it's going to be perfect. Instead, we said to this team, we want you to go learn. We want you to be scrappy, find cheap, fast solutions that get us answer to what we think the big problems are we need to solve, and then we'll scale it fast.
But did they have trouble being scrappy?
No, in fact, we let them set up their own work group. So they took all the cubicles out, they put whiteboards with wheels on them, right? They have a big round table in the middle of the work area. They have ideas of each of the 5 pilots that they're working on, and every day at the end of the day they get together. And this is all how they decided to work. They get together and they talk about what's working, what's not, and what they need help from different parts of the organization. So we pick them because of their own external DNA, if you will, of how they work and how they're energized. And so they were energized by the ambiguity. They were also, I think, fueled by the idea that someone's letting them explore without an ROI that's completely around this idea. And so the idea is be scrappy. So if you can have a solution that's $100 grand versus 10 million, that's great. But if you're going to learn and it's a little bit more expensive, that's great. But you've got to make decisions that are fast and allow you to fail forward, but fail fast.
Great. Trevor. So say your name and...
Trevor Miles from Canaxis, and Andrea, you almost took my answer away from me, or my question away from me, but I love that, because the real question I had, and thank you, Sharon, for bringing up the fact that innovation has multiple terms, because I was struggling with a discussion around collaboration, because to me, collaboration in the supply chain is more about the fact that we've got processes and systems that prevent different people from working together. They don't have their visibility, they don't have the information at hand. How they actually make those decisions now requires them to go and talk to somebody else and therefore collaborate. Whereas I think as we should be thinking about processes that eliminate that need because they have the data available to them, they have the analysis available to them. So the scrappiness, I love that because that's essentially what you're doing is you're giving those people access to the information and the capabilities to make decisions, eliminating that need for them to go next door and talk to somebody else who's incented differently from them, which gets back to metrics that matter, to persuade them that in fact this is in the corporate best interest, which then brings out all of this need for soft selling and the collaboration. So my question is, where are we actually going to find this breakthrough? Because it's not by persisting what we've done in the past, in my opinion.
So how's the breakthrough going to happen? Kim?
Oh, gosh,
Well, you're on the hot
Yeah.
seat between 2 women.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's my turn.
it's your turn. Yeah, I picked on you.
It's a great point. You mentioned gray area, and we were at the table and talking about the metrics that matter. And the person for me that I'm looking for is the one that, and so we're a bunch of engineers at Eastman, and sometimes we'll study it until, the nth degree or whatever, Six Sigma. And, the person that I think we're looking for is the one that has some data that senses something is happening and then goes to the various people who surround the supply chain to get something done. And whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, having the moxie to do that is what we're looking for, I think. And so I don't know if that's much of an answer, but
So we break through Moxie.
Yeah.
Okay,
so Moxie.
Andrea, how do we break through?
I think it's a combination of things that we're going to need. I don't know the perfect mix of what that looks like, but one of the things we've been talking a lot about is we have these processes, but are we creating, part of it's the org structure, right? How do you align around who does what jobs and what decision rights that people have? So we're playing around with a bit of that, saying, maybe supply chain is a functional help to the businesses and the businesses own all the decisions. So we're playing around with this combination of process, work structure, of what that looks like now to get to speed. And so to speed and to execution. I think a big piece of the secret there is going to be around insight versus data.
Okay.
And that's the visibility part.
Sharon, innovation, how do we drive it? Breakthrough.
I was just trying to think on at least what I look at Intel, the challenges, because we have the corporate mantra of, we've all got to work together, collaborate, do the best for the company. And that falls kind of short when you're sitting in the meeting and you get, I'm doing what's best for the company. So for me, it's aligning. We do a good job of defining what we want to do, but the how piece is where we actually break apart, because everybody kind of goes off and says, yep, we've all got a common goal, but we go back into the silos, whether it's technology development, manufacturing, name your organization. And we all have a little bit different spin, or the metrics aren't aligned. So I think if you can spend time up front and have goal clarity, as well as then how are we going to measure it, and how we measure it isn't necessarily by org boundary, then that's the challenge. Because I tend to see where we break down is on the decision making, or it doesn't come together until it's very high at the top, and then those individuals are so far removed from the reality of what's going on that they can't help with the tactical execution piece. And when we do a good job up front, we tend to have more, I think the way Andrea described the scrappy teams, when you have that united purpose, and for us, unfortunately, it tends to be when we have task force, how is it that we can harness that idea of, it's an oh shit, we got to recover, but how do you get that same mindset where we all come together and unify around the common purpose and we just are going to put our heads down and do it? How do you emulate that across just everyday business? And we haven't done it yet.
Okay, now I'm going to give you a challenge. I'd like you to sum up in one sentence what your recommendation would be for the people in the audience that want to be on the supply chains to admire. Do you want me to have one of the ladies go first?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Do I have a volunteer? Sharon?
Well, you did say one word or one sentence?
One sentence.
Endurance, tenacity, and commitment to excellence.
Great. Andrea?
Focused execution.
Focused execution. Now, Kevin.
I would say just never be afraid to reinvent yourself over and over again.
Yep. And so I think it takes this courageous leadership, this passion to be really curious, to be able to dance with gray, to be ambiguous, to be able to ask the questions that people go, oh my gosh, why are they asking that question, right? Thank you very much. I think let's give them a hand, and I have a book for you.